This project is a very wide table saw sled, and it's built for this sawstop saw because I switched saws. And it's got a stop on the side to catch on the table stop so you don't run all the way through the back of the blade cover box. And it's got a T-track for running various clamps for small pieces. It's got removable insets here. So for different blades and dados and angled blades, you can put in new sets of insets. It's got a removable fence on the front, or fence plate, a small removable fence plate on the back, right here on top of this. And I'm used actually zeroplay Microjig runners, 4 of them on this one saw. My smaller saw is only 2 runners, 1 on each side for the zeroplay Microjig. So based on the size of the tabletop of my sawstop, I've kind of come up with these dimensions for the top view here. The little dotted lines on the side are probably where I'm going to cut off some of the corners to decrease the weight of the table saw sled. I have to have a little overhang here because I'm up underneath the sled. There's going to be a little stop block screwed in there, and there'll be another one screwed into the side of the actual saw. And so when it runs up there, it'll hit that and stop you from running all the way through, because even if you do have a safety block on the back, which I will have, you could go through that too. So this stop block, the saw stop actually comes with some holes. My last table saw I actually had to drill into the metal and bolt in some a stop block up under there to hit the one on the sled, so when it goes past the blade, past the end here, it'll hit it. Now what I'm doing is zero clearance, and instead of having to route out a wider board, I'm just attaching a 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood on top of a 1/2 inch and leaving that slot in between for the removable inserts. Also on the back and front face, on the back I'll use 3/4, and the front probably 1/2 inch. But I'm again removable zero clearance, so the kerf will cut right through here, and this is going to be a 1/4 inch, and these are going to be sacrificial. Make about 4 or 5 of these for different blades, dado stacks and different angles, things like that. So that will have the kerf cut for zero clearance there, and then I'll insert some inset screws in here. And that's kind of the general idea. These are kind of my just dimensions. I'm just kind of fooling around with it. It's going to be, to the right of the blade, there's not as much table saw sled. To the left, again, weight is a consideration. I can already tell this is going to be really heavy, and my past sleds have been fairly heavy too, especially the first one I built, which was actually not even out of plywood, I don't think. No, it was solid wood. So we'll see that when I get down to the weight how much of this I have to cut off to kind of keep it manageable. There'll be other parts to it, of course, but this is just some of my initial dimensions and just give you an idea if this is the kind of saw you want to do. A lot of people do a little square here for the zero clearance and drop a block in and out. Forget it, I'm just going to do the whole thing across the back and screw it in. Use a lot of inserts for the screw holes so it can take it in and out. Same way here, I'll put some insets in here, screw insets. Okay, so this project is going to be a table saw sled. I've gave away one. These are 2 others I built, but I have a new saw now, so I'm going to need to build one to these specs. So this is going to be my basic design. I may change a little bit on dimensions. Do a tabletop between the back and front fence. I want at least 24 inches wide board that I can fit in there, and so I might have to recalculate based on how thick these fences are to make sure there's 24 inches between the front and back fence, which are going to be sitting on top. I may cut off the angles to kind of decrease the weight on it. I'm going to use on the bottom a 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood and maybe a 3/8 inch on top of that, and I'm going to glue a piece there and there and leave this gap for the removable insets. And on the front and back fence, I'm going to do the full length removable inset on there instead of trying to fit little squares in here. On the back fence, same way, full length removable inset. And I'll make multiple ones, probably about 4 of them total. Now on my saw stop, I measured to make sure this overhangs the left side a little bit on the table. And I'm going to put a stop block underneath the table saw sled and put one attached to my saw, so when it runs along the side and it hits that, it'll stop instead of going all the way through. I mean, yes, I'll put a little protective box there, but to keep it from going through the protective box, I always put a stop block on my past ones. Past saw I had to actually screw into the metal and put a block, but this saw stop looks like it's got some holes along the left side that I can attach a board to block it from going past the end. So yeah, my removable insets, I'm gonna do, you know, just a full length on the front and back, and just keep replacing those. I thought of doing a 1/4 inch, but I don't know, I may do 3/8, we'll see. I'm gonna double up this back fence to 3/4 thick to give it more stability on the back of the saw. So people call that the front, I don't know, I call it the back. And so that'll be doubled up, so I've got to recalculate that. And my insets, I might do a 1/4, I might do 3/8 on these removable ends. So then I got to make sure I got my 24 inch. I've got various insets to screw into, threaded slot ones. Don't need T-bars for these because some of them use a hex wrench and some of them use a screwdriver to screw them in. So I don't need the T-bar for most of these. I got T-nuts just in case I decide to do that from the bottom, but I think probably go threaded insert if they're not too wide. I had shortened my saw on the right side for room space to get around it at some point, the outfeed table. So the first pieces, it's a 3/8 piece and the 1/2 inch base piece. They're gonna be glued together. I ripped it long ways on the table saw, but this crosscut I don't think I want to do on the table saw, so I'm going to use the Festool track saw to saw through that. I like to line them both up together and do them both at once. I get the same length, but we'll see. I realized I can't cut both pieces together because this one's going to be just have a divider in it. But I did use some masking tape on the bottom since I'm going to use a track saw and I don't want it to splinter out too much on the plywood, and then I'll flip it over. So for my removable inserts, this is going to be the center line, which will actually be over the blade. I just moved over here now because I'm getting ready to cut a piece to put on this right side. My maximum dado stack, I think I've got a DeWalt dado stack, is 23 millimeters or 29/32 of an inch. So the dado will go to the right of the blade, of course. And so I got enough room here to put the screws in without coming too close to the dado stack. That's what I want to make sure. So I'm doing about a 4-inch wide, 2-inch on each side, to give me clearance to put the screws in and not be close to the blades. So, you know, when I'm trying to line up, this is going to be the removable section for the 2 inserts, or 1 plate actually. I'm trying to line up these on the side, getting ready for the glue up. I'm thinking, you know, if they're a little tilted one way or the other, I might have to cut these insets all the time at weird angles, tapered, and I don't want to deal with that. So, I mean, yeah, I guess you could sand and all that, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick one in here. I cut 3 of them while I had the table saw set up. I'm going to stick one in here, put some packing tape on the back side so the glue doesn't stick. Stick one in here and line up the 2 sides. I mean, I know the upper board and the lower board are not going to be lined up with each other, and I'm going to end up probably having to trim those a little bit more. Probably always good to keep a little extra. I didn't cut it too close for the 24 inches that I went from front to back to put a board in there. So I've got a little room. I'm going to trim those off, but I know that they're not going to line up, especially when you start using track saws for cuts. Although the last couple I ran on the table saw, but didn't want to run a real long piece on the end. So that's my idea. I mean, I'll see if it works or doesn't work, but I'm going to set this in here and then clamp to that. So at least I won't have to cut, in the future, won't have to cut tapered edges on my insets. Here's the 2 sides of the panel. Glue is drying now. It's about this point where I get it all over the floor and over my shoes and all over everything else, and having to pull out all the clamps. I'm starting to think maybe I should have just routed this middle piece. Might have been easier. So anyway, I'm going to pop that out now. I took the clamps off, used a card scraper to go along some of the edges here. There was a little bit of squeeze out in these areas, just a few little areas there, and just clean that up with a card scraper. Got a little bit on the surface too. I was kind of surprised. I'm still using a little card scraper, though I may sand it later, we'll see. But there's the insert. It's got a little play in it. I found if you kind of like switch ends, it doesn't play as much, which is kind of surprising since it seemed like it was in there, but there's probably going to be some sawdust getting these little areas here. We'll see how that works out. Could actually sand down and get it flush. It's not bad. It's not exactly flush, but again, there's a little bow to this board. I noticed ahead of time. I think if I put it in like that, yeah, it's better. So next, we're going to see about straightening up some of these corners, get them closer to 90 by running it through the table saw. Okay, I'm doing a glue up. I used putty knife to spread it again, just like I did on the other plywood. If you do have two pieces that are kind of cupped, like if it's kind of cupped like this and like that, put the outer edges together. These were so straight, this 3/4 stuff is straighter than the 3/8, that it only one slight angle at the very end of the board, otherwise they were perfectly straight. So it wasn't a big choice on putting them together, but yeah, you want to run cup to cup, you know, so they push in the middle, keep the ends closer. So anyway, yeah, that's the clamping. Spread the glue and let it dry overnight like I did the base. The base is over here. I went ahead and cut some back fences out of the, is that 3/8? Oh no, that's 1/4 to put. It's a sacrificial for the back and front fence on top of that 2 to 3/4 inch ones I got. So I cut about 4 of those. This is how I plane my back fence. Some people call it front fence. I call it back fence, the working fence. I just scraped off the glue on one side first and then ran it through in both sides and then flipped it over and ran it through the other side instead of using a planer. This seems to work fine. I'll check it that it's 90, but this blade's digitally set for 90. Well, yeah, I run into a complication after the glue up. There's actually a fairly big cup here with this gap. I don't know if you can see it in the middle. It's flat on the ends. I don't know, something happened. The way the glue got absorbed, or, you know, I didn't put a lot of weight on top of it. I had cross cowls across it. I don't know what the heck happened, but this board's now warped. And it is not even close to being something you could use tolerable because that big gap, I don't know if you can see that light through there. It is flat on each end. From the middle down, from there it's flat, and from the right part it's flat too. So I'm thinking I'm just going to slice it right down the middle here and then join it with the front and back fence, rejoin it, leave a gap there and see if that'll flatten it out since both halves are flat. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe if this is flat and that's flat, something of those got to be curved in here or warped, right? So anyway, we'll see if that works. If it doesn't, I may end up getting just a 3/4 piece. Right now this is a 1/2 inch and a 3/8, so I've got about 7/8 thickness. I end up getting a 3/4 piece and just routing it out, doing it that way. We'll see. So what I've done is I use a drill press, drill from underneath and countersink from underneath holes along the sides and the front here. Gotta be careful you don't come up through the middle portion here like I started to do on one of them. Kind of got a little bit lost on where I was from the underside. So then I put the tape where the runners are going to be, because I'm getting ready to downsize this so it won't be so heavy. So I'm going to cut material out of here, and then I'm going to reconnect the front, screw it up, which won't matter as much. Then put the back on temporarily. At some point I need to put screw inserts in here for the screw down the inserts, the removable inserts, but a little ways from that. I'm still seeing if it line up. Again, I had to cut it in half because it was kind of a little cupped or bowed. I can't remember if it was cupped or bowed, but it seems to be sitting pretty flat now. See what happens when I attach the back to it. So for the front fence, I'm just kind of looking over things. It's about 6 inches high, which should give me plenty of height without the blade going out the top. Probably should have even made it a little shorter. I did measure blades up, and blades at 45. I got about 2 inches either side here for a 4-inch layover. I'm just trying to draw out a pattern to kind of cut some of the material out of here. So I just took some of my old circles and threw them on there and a piece of paper, and I'm going to make a little curve here, and then I'll flip it over and use it on the other side. I don't think anything has to be exact, just leave myself enough room for a 45 cut. I'm going to cut out the very bottom of this because I'm worried that it's going to trap the centerpiece from sliding out. It's too tight. So I'm going to cut out the bottom there. Then you say, well, you lose your zero clearance. But when I put the little removable zero clearance on the front of here, that'll hold it down tight. Because I'm also thinking, hey, you know, do you want extra screws or you want it to hold it down? The good thing about the removable one is every time I change the insert here, I'll change the removable fence on the front. Same, you know, same material, 1/4 inch. So that's my plan. Oh, that's 1/4 or 3/8. It looks like 3/8 maybe. Okay, yeah, it's 3/8. So I might even cut a little notch out right here to allow me to pull that thing out too. So I think it's going to be hard to slide out when it's tight. I put that piece on there and held it down tight and I couldn't slide it out. So I might put a little finger thumb hold right here, curved out of here. See how that works out. Again, I'll have a disposable or removable inset on the front of this face, and that can push down and lock it in without having to put extra screws on the very end here. Just put a couple in the middle. I'm getting ready to cut out the main fence. Some people call it back. Some people call it front fence. It seems like back fence to me since it goes in last when you're going toward the blade. But anyway, it's about 3 1/4 from here to here. I kind of looked at how deep my clamps went, you know, so I could clamp over it and around it and get some small pieces down the bottom, and that should do it. And the middle part here is a little over 6 inches, which is probably a bit overkill, but I don't have my tallest blade on right now to measure, and I don't want to switch all out the brake and everything on the sawstop, so I made it extra big because I have some other blades that are taller than this rip blade. Now, to make the curves, again, I just use some stain cans and things. Like you can see this stain can fit right in that one, and used a different one for the other curve there, and drew it and flipped it, held it up to the window so I could see that line right there on the back to line it up. And so yeah, so also when I'm cutting here on the table saw, I'm going to cut the straight line here and flip it around and do the other one. I want to make sure I don't get too close to this area with the bottom of the blade here. So I kind of looked at it from above and showed, hey, this is where the bottom blade, and this is where I'll see the top about here, and that's where I should about stop, and then I'll bandsaw out the rest of it and then sand it down. So, you know, I did recess this out on the bandsaw so I can slide this in and out, but I need something to hold it down, so I don't have to put screw inserts real close to the end. So I'm making this piece here. Yeah, it's not quite as tall, but it's actually 2 pieces taped together. I'm going to go just bandsaw it, and I'm going to go take it to the sander now, smooth down, then bring it down to the pencil line here. So, and then I'm going to use there's 2 of these, but I wish I'd taped them the first time because I dropped them on the floor and got mixed up and turned backwards. Now the pencil line was in between the 2, but I redrew another one. So I'm just going to sand it down here on the sander, and then I'll put some insert screws through it, drill them both together at once. Again, I'm going to leave this tape on there to try to keep it lined up a little better. And then that'll be you don't really need a front fence sacrificial piece. You don't really need zero clearance on the blade or know exactly where the blade is, but I'm using it mostly to hold it down, and then I can unscrew it, remove it, and then slide out the table saw blade insert when I need to. So to make my disposable removable inset, again, you probably don't need one on the front, but I'm using it to hold down this piece here, so I don't have to put extra. As you can see, I recessed out the bottom of the front piece. They call it back piece on some people. I don't know. It seems like front piece. It goes in first. So what I did is I drilled some holes here. I did it stacked, of course, together, so they're the same, the holes. And then I used a countersink bit here because my center punch was too big on the end, my smallest one, to fit in the hole. So I had to countersink it. You got to make sure you hold it very straight, give it a good pop. And it put 2 little marks in there. I can see them. So now I'm going to put my insets in there. I'm using 8/32 insets, I think. So I went ahead and made sure you use a drill press because this needs to be exactly perpendicular to your workpiece. As you can see, I did a sample one with a hand drill, and it came in at an angle. I don't know, maybe I started at an angle too because I started using a screwdriver. These have a little threaded, these are 8/32 insets. These have a little threaded, and I'm sorry, where you can use a screwdriver to screw those in, but I found that this T-bar, this 8/32 T-bar, which is right here, T-wrench, 8/32. I have different size insets too. I may use bigger ones for the back fence. But anyway, I found that I could not get this one out with a screwdriver. I sacrificed it pretty much. It started to strip out. It's not the strongest material, but believe me, that sucker's not going anywhere. You don't have to glue it in or anything, just screw it in there, and it is not going anywhere. So I went ahead and I kind of taped this up so it wouldn't slide too much to put my front sacrificial piece or zero clearance. Used my little metal hole puncher, but I noticed not all of them are exactly right in the middle where you'd like it. Might have been better to do a pencil. A little better off. Hope we got enough leeway to fit 4 of these in here without being off center enough where they won't line up with holes. We'll see. The other worked on the shorter piece, but there was only 2 there. So when I was putting in the inserts on the back fence, some people call it the front fence, one of the T-wrenches broke off in there, left a piece in there. When I tried to get it out with a screw extractor kit and tried to drill it, first you got to drill a hole with a regular bit. When I drilled a hole with a regular bit, it pushed it down even further, and that's low enough. Actually, I can use a little bit shorter screw, but it's a shame it doesn't match. So then I got kind of nervous about this popping off that easy. I did have actually a spare one, which helped, because when I tried to use a screwdriver, you can tell it kind of tore up the area around it to get it underneath the surface, which is what you want. But anyway, maybe these inserts aren't the best is what I'm thinking. I don't know what they're made out of. It says brass. Okay, that's kind of soft. Maybe stainless steel or something would be harder if they make them, but they're high point ones and they chip out easy when you're using the screwdriver and thing. I wouldn't really recommend them. You can see I got my second 8/32 screw set here. I had some shorter ones in there that I'm going to use for that one hole. So when I did the 5 screws on the back fence, this one here was the one that was a little off center and it had to come in at an angle and was sitting above. So I went out and I just drilled the hole a little elongated on this upper side where it was a little tight, but then I had to go back on every single one of these, make a bigger countersink and elongate the hole on that one and all the other 3 fences for zero clearance. The back one's the important one. So it's done, but boy, maybe I should have used a pencil hole or a pencil mark and then used an awl to punch the hole after the pencil mark, because that center punch, I know you're supposed to keep it exactly perpendicular to the surface, but it didn't work very well. So, but anyway, for the other, they're all lined up. After I got them all lined up, I took it back one more time for sanding up on here to get it, even on the sander here. Just with this fence though, I didn't put all the other ones on there. So anyway, at some point I'm going to be staining these, so I'm not sure if I'm going to go back and do all those or not. Probably ought to attach them all. So I set up a chamfer bit and chamfered all these on my, what I call the back fence, and took a little edge off there. A little hard to see, isn't it? Not quite. It's a little blurry, but anyway, I ran them all one at a time. It was fine, no chip out. There was a 4th one that I did that was still attached to the fence, and just ran that through and just chamfered, moved it in and out, and did a trial piece first to see how deep I wanted to make it, just to catch. That's the reason. And you'll see is up under here to let little saw dust particles and wood chips and get up under there so they don't push your piece out a little bit from the fence and make it out of square. So it's just a little relief to get that in there. I don't know if I put that on my past table saw sleds or not. I think 1 or 2 I have, others I haven't. Hadn't been a big deal if you take a brush and swipe it and everything, but just save you if you're doing multiple cuts, maybe swipe it a little bit less. So when I actually put this is the second piece, sacrificial piece that goes in the front here. This is not as crucial as the back part you're pushing through, because it's just the front part. But it was set up a little higher, had a little ridge on both sides there, so it must have slipped when I was marking the spots in the middle. I should have clamped it beforehand and then marked the spots. So anyway, what I did is I had to elongate the hole by taking a drill bit and pushing up in that area. I had to elongate the countersink, pushing up the area. Then I clamped it. Then I put it back on. Now I'm going to go final sanding. I left a little proud, I don't know if you can see that, to go ahead and sand it down now that it's screwed in to this way. So when you bandsaw these pieces out, the sacrificial limbs, sacrificial plates, just make sure that you cut them a little wider so you can sand down, in case you have to adjust it a little bit like I did. So I have to decide where to put my track. That's for clamp down for angled pieces or small pieces. And I don't want to get too close to where the runners are going to be coming up through here. So I think I have to drill through from this side too for the runners. And I don't want to hit the blade with the clamps here. And I have the other clamp too that slides down from above. I figure it's probably better to use this for small pieces. I've never used this in my previous table saw sleds, and there's a third one actually somewhere. I've never used these before. Not sure I'll need to use it a lot, but I figure if there's a little tiny piece I don't want to get my fingers too close to the blade, it might be good. So I kind of decided on about a bit over 4 inches from the blade where it's coming through, and for my inset zero, again, I didn't want to reach out into here, especially with an angle blade or something coming up. Don't want to hit it. And we'll see if that works. I mean, I kind of looked through other people's plans. I think I saw one person that put 4 inches out from it, but it's not really a consensus. I see some people where it's way out here, which kind of makes some sense for certain things, but not small pieces. So I went ahead and did multiple passes to route the dado for the T-track. The you know, I had to do it sample piece. Did it twice. First one was slightly deep. I thought the second one was closer. And when I finally did it, it was funny because like this side was a little higher, this end was a little higher. Didn't have enough pressure. I guess that was on the part I fed through first, I guess. Yeah, the first part, the first feed, as you're pushing down, make sure you push down and get tight on there. So I made lots of passes, and at the end it still was like a little bit higher on one side than the other. So I took my chisel and put the bevel downside and ran it to kind of take out one side more to bring it back down. You don't want it sitting higher, of course, because it might hit your board. You can't slide your board past it. But you don't want it sitting too low either, because then when you clamp stuff, it's gonna push up out of it if you're clamping straight on there. Well, yeah, it probably will anyway. Anyway, I'm gonna use some epoxy and sand and shave off some screws or grind them down so they fit in this area. So it's done now. It's got this one's almost dead even right toward the end there. Up here it's got a little bit more edge on it. So yeah, it just took a lot of passes and twice, and it worked. I did it like a lot of other people. I did my outside edges first, then I routed all the between, then it was still a little narrow, so I had to take one outside edge a little further. Again, this is where my runner is going to be. Don't want to be on top of that because screws and things. So I'm going to use a little 2-part epoxy in there eventually and screw it, but I'm still got to shellac the outside, put a few more screw holes and do some other stuff. So I took the T-track and cut it on the miter saw, and then to cut the end I switched around here because the hole was closer to the end here, and I know the fence will be holding this down here. This I had to cut it shorter because you got to be able to fit this clamp in here and slide it in. So I just kind of stuck the temporary, just set it up there and cut it wide enough where I can get that in and slide down. Plus I don't think I'll be clamping way out the board this wide. If I did, I guess I could bring a clamp in. Well, no, you couldn't do that and run it, but I could bring one of these clamps and angle it. One of the other clamps I have, the flatter kind of V-shaped one. So basically I could have drilled some more holes in here, but I just cut on the miter saw and took a little sandpaper and brushed it up. It didn't really have much of a burr on it. I cut pretty clean on the miter saw with a wood blade, because it's aluminum. So that's after I ground down the screw. It got pretty hot. I think I'm going to use a pair of pliers on it. I ground the tip off. It's still a little too close for my liking. Even though this will be sitting up on the runner, which will make it slightly above the table, so it shouldn't hit the table, but when you push down real hard, it's a little closer than comfort. It's enough to bite on with that, though, at least to give it some hold. So yeah, use a pliers or something because they heat up, and I might need a little water to dip it into. To make sure the holes, I actually put them about a 1/2 inch in, and I spaced them out kind of to make sure that they were all lined up with each other. I clamped 2 ends of the board, then I took tape, wrapped around like 4 different areas and both ends, and had it all taped up, and then ran it through the drill press so that none of them slid on the other one. Seemed to have worked okay. So again, I brought about a 1/2 inch in from each side, 1/2 inch, and just kind of space out. Now, I don't have any holes near the ends because I'm hoping that the zero clearance plates will push down on that, not the actual. This actual part here has been already bandsawed out, but this extra zero clearance plate on here is, I think, is going to push down on there. These are all the screws that I did a few extra. that I've ground off on the grinding wheel. These are the insets. I'm soaping these suckers so they don't bust my T-wrench next time. Got a different T-wrench this time too. 8/32. It's a 8/32, and these are 8/32. And when I'm drilling my holes to receive these at zero clearance, I'm making sure I'm pressing it in, finding the spot in the middle of the hole with the tip of the blade, looking for the indentation, getting it set up, locking it in good. You don't want even a little movement. You're not going to get them all lined up. I've got 2 coats of polyurethane on the surfaces that aren't going to be mating with the other surface. 1 coat on the other surface. I did sand down a few rough spots from the first coat, and this is my 2nd coat on the outward surfaces. I use this polyurethane clear set, and says fast drying, but that really means 3 to 4 hours. If you use shellac, probably 15-30 minutes, maybe a lot thinner coat with shellac, not as much protection. I went ahead and bought this online. I thought it would be much bigger. Here's my finger, kind of small. This is for the T-track to glue it in. I'm gonna glue it and screw it both for extra, so when I'm clamping, pressure's pulling up on it, don't want it to pull out. The other 2 halves, so far I guess I've only done 1 coat on each side of the polyurethane, and I've done both sides though. I'll probably do a lot more once it's assembled, but right now there's some areas that will be hard to get at. Why am I putting the coat on there? Is it to resist glue or water or stability? I don't know, maybe all the above. I doubt it's going to be thick enough to, prevent dings and things in the wood, but it will hopefully help add a little dimensional stability for warping, because plywood can warp, as we saw when this piece was one full piece, had some cupping in it. And I don't know if it'll prevent it for Baltic birch plywood if you really need it, but it also will help prevent little glue stick-ons and things like that. And it makes it look a little nicer, and right now it's a little rough. It raised the grain on there. So again, I did do a little sanding on the other pieces, but not on these yet. So what I did here is I used this zeroplay miter bar. I've got actually 4 of them, not cheap, and I had to actually stack two nickels under each one to get it slightly above the surface on this sawstop. It's got a really deep miter slot, so it'd be like 2, 4, 6, 8 nickels there, or 2, 4, 6, 8. So now I got double stick Turner's tape. I think I got it at Woodcraft, and I peeled off both sides, so I got the sticky stuff on both sides, and I'm going to use that to push the table saw sled straight down on, put a lot of weight on it, and flip it over, and then screw it up from below through these holes, so I don't have to guess. I mean, the miter bar instructions are every 4 inches and yada yada, and try to line it up. I did kind of measure these the same here and here, and just made sure I was past the back fence. You don't have to, because eventually I am going to have holes from above. Once I drill it up from below, you got to do a Forstner bit and drill down a little bit, and then put the screw and come into this copper sleeves here. So there will be some holes in the top, so I didn't want them coming through where the fence is, the back and front, so I kind of spaced it that way. My table saw sled goes from the back table saw all the way to the front. It's exact maybe 27.5 inches, maybe a ½ inch longer. So that's, I had to set them back from the front a little bit too, so I don't hit the front fence there. Thing I forgot to tell you about these zeroplay miter bars. I took a piece of paper, folded over half, stuck it in a little groove here to give myself a little leeway, a little play for when I eventually attach them. Plus I got 4. They say they expand a little bit when you screw them down. I'm going to screw it from below once I put this table saw sled on there, and then use those holes from above to come back down and catch these screws here. But I did put that double piece of paper to give myself play, especially with 4 of these. I mean, if you're having 2, you can make it a little tighter, but by the time you get 4 of those on, the odds of those being all lined up, I think, are pretty low. We'll see. So first I put in this piece here, and it's not too far off. It's pretty good. A little bit under this edge is a little under. It could be raised, put some shims of tape under there and raise it up if I really need to. Down here's the important end though. It's a little bit high there. Even though I've clamped that down, I might have to sand that or put another screw in. Yeah, that would take a lot. it could be done. So anyway, I put this end on, and what I did is I used some exterior screws just because I don't ever want it to rust with drywall. I want this thing to last. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. I used 2-inch screws coming up through here, countersunk. So first I did a clearance hole in here on the drill press, so you know it's 90 degrees, but then the hole just short of the threads to drill that up through there. I had to do it from underneath. Wasn't hard to use the weight of the table saw sled to force down on it. And I took the screws, soaked them up, of course, and they went in pretty easy. Didn't strip or anything. But you know, I started wondering on that back fence when I put that in, those final screws, even if it's clamped down like this, is it going to move? Because you know, screws, if that's slightly at an angle, I mean this hole's okay, the clearance hole, but it's too much room, but the hole is a little short of the threads. If it's slightly at an angle, it could pull that fence over even with clamps on. We'll have to see how that turns out. Might have to use a 5-cut method rather than just line it up one time and to square and get the fence set and doing it. I know Stumpy Nubs uses the runners to adjust. He leaves them a little loose. Don't think I'm going to be doing that. Ignore what I said about this edge being a little high. This is not the important side. This is the business end down here, and that's actually pretty even. Plus I haven't put the face piece on here that will push down on it. I still got that little gap there so I can slide it out. So what I did now is I lined up this center curve here with the sled, because I'm going to take this off and put the runners here. I kind of want to get an idea how much back and forth, so I'll use that sled when I step back down on top of the runners, but I need to do that first. Now I'll go get the nickels to put in the slot to raise the runners up. I'm using the zeroplay Microjig sliders. I'm going to actually, such a long table saw, I'm going to put like 2 here and 2 here. I'll not need that many. I guess I could probably get away with 2 on one end and 1 on the other. We'll see. One of the pitfalls drilling back down through the top with these already attached is I went a little too far and it cracked off the end of this one. It's alright, I still had 2 screws I could use, so I used the middle one. The other thing I found out is when you're first drilling this, use a really tiny bit, because I used a little bit bigger bit than this, which wasn't very big, but what happened is it tore out the opposite side. The fibers got really long splits when it came through. I mean, yeah, I guess maybe if you had a board under it might stop it. I tried that once and I don't think it worked great, trying to hold it under there. So better just use a really tiny bit, because all that polyurethane, I think, formed like glue layer or something on there, and then the fibers split like long ways along there. So that was a bit of a problem. So I'm going to go back and put a few more screws. I've got 2 on each, 2, and I put it on there and it slides great first time around. Don't have to adjust anything, take anything off. So the actual double stick tape held up despite me manipulating a lot by putting it on the drill press table and this and that. So it actually worked quite well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish a few more in the middle now, just for extra support because it's working so well. But yeah, it slides great. So for the Forstner bit depth, some of these I pre-did on the drill press table, and with preset depth measured out all the screws. It tells you on the Microjig it wants 5/8 underneath it or something hanging out. But anyway, for the other ones I couldn't fit on the drill press table because of the size of it. It was blocked by the from the upright. So I ended up having to do some from above with this without the drill press, and I used the slide rule here to see if I show you, just to measure how long from one there to, and just kept going little bits at a time until I got it right here. So I'm putting in extra screws. Now some of that tear out I was talking about went long ways like that because I used too big a bit coming through, which was really pretty small. Here's some more here. I'm gonna have to sand that down probably and either use some little wood filler, I think, and maybe repolyurethane the top. What I've done now is I've ran my cut to about here's where I stopped, and then I went ahead and clamped on my back fence. As you can tell, there's more of a gap down here. It's a little bit off here, and slid it, retested it, tested it, used a metal card scraper without much burr on the end at least, and also tried to shim up and down, and also looked at it to kind of see the gap, and it looks like it's pretty darn good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and run some screws in there. I'm not going to pre-drill. I went ahead and ran a test piece from one of my leftover scraps here to see if I could get the screw in without pre-drilling, because I'm a little worried that when I pre-drill it might be angled a little bit away and pull it out of the clamps. So the first couple screws I'll put in without pre-drilling, then I'll pre-drill after that. I might have to use a little bit shorter screw because these pretty long ones might get kind of tight by the time they get down in there. I thought I could get by but just eyeballing, but I wasn't. It was a little bit off, about equal to 2 of these little shims I got. Get this shim set. So I call it the 20 cut method because I could have maybe 10 or 15 times on this board until I got no light on the square, just nice and 90 degrees on the square there. So now I'm going to I clamp this board with the shims. I'm going to take the shims out. I'll slide this forward. Make sure you don't do what I do. Originally I put all my screws in. Thank God I only used the 1 5/8. I can still put the longer ones in, or I can reuse the spots. I'll put a few longer ones, shorter ones. So I'm going to leave it screwed in down there, and there's one screw down here where I've been doing all these practice cuts. I did make sure that my fence was flat across, so that wasn't messing me up, so that was good. You can also see I did sand down around every Forstner. The Forstner left it up, so even though I'd already polyurethane it, I took a orbital sander and went down. When I re-polyurethane, I'm going to put tape and make sure it don't get in here. It'll be like glue. Hard to get the inserts out. So I'm not getting any more polyurethane in there, but I'll around each of these holes that was a rough edge. I don't want to mar any of my work pieces in the future with scratches. So these 2 little shims finally did it. Looks like now we'll slide the fence forward, re-screw it, and then we'll see if that works. So I put on the faces here, the sacrificial zero clearance. Don't really need a zero clearance on the front, but I did it anyway. I thought it might push down. Doesn't push down much. This one is chamfered along the bottom edge for the dust, which is a nice thing. I didn't have to chamfer the main fence, which allows you to set the right angle square better against there. The T-track, the reason there's a gap here at the end is in order to be able to pull this clamp out. You know, you got to be able to get it out there and put it in. You can use either kind. Again, I got this kind, or I got this for probably short pieces, or if you're really going to do an angled piece. The stop has been put on now. The stop, what I did is I put this block on the side of my table saw. It had some holes already in it, so I was able to use those. And there's some nuts and screws on either side. In my old table, I had to actually drill the holes through the side to put the stop on there. So this one's attached to the table, of course, sanded it because I don't want to bleed. Sand the ends. Then this stop, I took 2 screws, went up through here. I did glue it. It's one of the few things I glued, just a T-track and this, and ran 2 screws, 1 5/8 up through there, and I was able to put a clamp on the end right here and then put 1 screw through there and then put the other one through there. Glue's still drying right now. So what'll happen is and to measure that stop, what I did is I put the blade all the way up, cut all the way through, then I brought it back to where the peak of the blade touches right where that highest point after it had already run through, so I know it's the highest point. I'd already gone through the back. You can see how much it sticks out. Next I got to work on the box for that, and that's where I set my stop. So when I'm going forward, this is attached to this, not the table. This is attached to the table. This will stay on here. So when I'll do it, what I'll do is it'll come up. I'm sorry. Get off the picture, and it catches right there. Okay, there we go. That blade's catching a little bit. So you're sawing along. You don't want to go too far out the back of your box. Bang. Stop right there. I did this on my other ones. It worked fine. Now is for my back safety block. I'm going to use some pocket hole screws to temporarily hold it in while I glue it, and then I'm going to remove them. Put plexiglass across the top. So all I did is take a pocket hole jig and the bit, and I'm drilling in at a 45, and then it'll be like that going into the back of the fence while it holds it until the glue dries. And then I'm going to plexiglass, the Sinal acrylate plexiglass glue for the back and here, and even this little surface. I'll probably need a piece of plexiglass, but I'm not going to put anything on the bottom. Trying to hold my weight down, that's why I cut it at 45 degrees there. Got just long enough for that pocket hole screw to have a track to go into. I guess it could have been shorter though, it would have just been like that. So we'll see how that works. I've done pocket hole screws before for my fence on the back, and I left them in, but with this blade, sawstop, no chance. I'm not leaving any screws anywhere near the blades. And for this blade cover box is to super glue this on, plexiglass. Had some leftover pieces, do one there, one there. There's not going to be any bottom. I had to build up the base here because you don't want to get it below this in case I need to move the fence in the future a little in or out if it's a little out of alignment. I want it sitting above that bottom part because it's sitting in a little bit on this side, so you would be hitting that. I will probably build up underneath it a loose piece with a gap here underneath these pieces. I'm going to sand this down here, these areas, sand down and glue it. I'm going to use a temporary pocket screw to hold it in while it glue dries. Because again, then I'm going to remove the screws because I don't want any screws near my blade, even though I don't think it can reach that far. So I decided to change my design. Originally this was going to be so little set back on that notch on the bottom so it would sit above here, so in the future I can adjust it in and out without attaching it to the face, just the fence. But I decided to make it out of one piece, so I didn't do that to start with just a little notch out of it at the bottom so it can go, so that can go above there. Well, it'll be here actually, be above there so it can go in and out in the future if I ever need to readjust the fence. And I'm going to glue this long grain of course. And I got a pocket hole screw put in there just to hold it temporarily. I'm going to put in there till the glue dries, and I'm going to remove it. I wish I had done a domino tenon here and here back when the fence was unattached. Right now I think the domino would hit the edge of the fence, would hit this piece down here, the lip that sticks out, so it wouldn't be flat flush. Or I guess you could use wood dowels too to kind of glue it in that way without screws. Yeah, I wish I'd done the domino tenon, but this will probably work. I mean, it's kind of a pain to have it glued there in case I ever need to replace it. It'll chip off the back of the fence too when I need to do that, but that's just future. If somebody else wanted to put a domino tenon in there that way, you can do it. You can put a fence on your domino, you know, against your fence, clamp something so it doesn't slide, and cut one in there and then just slide it on there with tenons or wood dowels. What I learned is this is not the best way to do it. First I tried to use a 1 1/4 inch Kreg screw for the pocket hole, and with a thick, not fine, but for softer wood, and that drove it back. So I went over real quick, ran over and got some 1 inch fine screws. That worked. I was able to suck it in without it driving it back from without being pre-drilled in here into the base. And it was much shorter. This was going to be way too long. I underestimated how far in. Just a little bit of that head catches there, and it really goes deeper than I want. And then it sucked it in at the top, and the bottom was not tight. So I just sit here with my hands pushing in for like 9 minutes. I had them clamp like this with my body weight going forward to try to bring in the bottom edge there, because only the top half from here to here was making contact because the screws pulled and sucked it into tight. So basically this is not the best way to do it. I mean, yeah, it'll work. I'm going to take the screws out, like I said, I'm not leaving them in. It would have been better if I'd done a tenon, maybe a big tenon mortise. I thought even maybe peg it with a wood peg through here so I could be removable, just glue it into the fence with a long tenon, and then mortise it in here and put a pegged round wood peg that could be drilled out or whatever in the future and removed. So I'm not sure how long this is going to last with the plexiglass and all, and just glue joints, but we'll see. I noticed when I was almost at the end of my cut that I had a little bit of play on it. Most boards are only this thick or shorter, the blade would have already been through. If I ever had to cut something really tall, there was a little bit of play. So I took these 3 screws out, pried it off the double stick tape, expanded a little bit the runner to make it a little tighter, put it back on there. Now it's perfect. When I did that, I grabbed this back block for my safety guard blade, and it popped right off because the glue had only been drying about 2 hours, and I didn't even think what I was doing. So I've decided to go ahead and put dominoes in here. This is my setup right now. I got one in there, and I'll cut one on the other side, and then I'm going to cut them in the supports. Glue just didn't hold. Maybe the polyurethane I'd put on there earlier had soaked into pores enough. I mean, I sanded it down to bare wood, but it might have soaked in further than that, deeper than that. And maybe I just didn't let it dry long enough. But anyway, I decided to put dominoes in there. Okay, so I got all the slots cut and everything for this, and it actually feels pretty sturdy when I put it on there, which I haven't quite pushed it all the way in yet, but yeah, it actually feels very sturdy. This one actually, when I clamped the board to put the cutter, the Festool domino cutter on there, it slanted a little bit this way, as you can tell. So I actually compensated for this one with a little bit of a slant too by building up some duct tape along one edge, so it would sit up a little bit at an angle, and it seems to go on there. So it's pretty close to being square, and since I'm just going to put plexiglass glued on there, I think we're going to be good. Again, I think I'm going to leave the pocket hole screws out this time. It's just sucked in the top and pulled the bottom out, and glue those on. But I got to sand some stuff down first. The old glue off there. The glue up for these domino tenons was kind of hairy. I put the regular wood glue on the tenons and inside, and then I went to mix the I had the leftover from the T-Track, this 5-minute epoxy, and one of the tubes was blocked. First I tried it and it squirted out one side. I thought both sides were going because the plunger went down, but once that glue was already drying over here, then this one wouldn't squirt out one of the tubes. I ended up trying to cut the end a few times. I finally clipped into the tube with the wire cutters. Got that mixed up, and by the time I got that put on there, this tenon here, where I don't know if it wasn't in far enough to start with, but I couldn't push this one in all the way tight. I ended up having to grab a saw and slice off about 1/4 inch of that tenon so it could push up tight against there. I used the epoxy, 5-minute epoxy, for the joint against the between the block for the protect the blade and the fence. I used that there. I think it's a little more gap filling, and I could put pressure easier for 5 minutes than I can for the wood glue that before didn't stick very well. So I think that's going to be really solid. You can see I plugged these Craig hole screw too with a couple wood plugs, but we're sanding it off. But so now next I'll put plexiglass here. But yeah, it was a hairy glue up, but it was still wet. I kept checking it. It wasn't drying on me by the time I got the cut off with the hand saw. I cut off the end of the domino about that much so I could fit it tight, which is keeping me from pushing it in. Those kind of things, need to be anticipated. I tried the tube first to make sure it squirted out, but apparently it was only squirting out one side, and it fooled me. The side was blocked, but I actually cut part way into the tube with wire cutters and just took it straight out of the end of the tube there, right down in that area. To cut the plexiglass, used a little bit of a backer board, left the plastic on the outside so I could draw the line on there, and just cut real slow when you use your miter saw, just a regular blade. Just go real slow through it. It does heat up, it tends to stick to the thing underneath it, the board just lightly, being a slight melt. So now I went ahead and glued these on. What I did is I rounded down the corners. I used a high grit and then a lower grit. Then a 220, start out with like a 60 grit, 220, rounded off all these edges, all the edges. I don't want anything sharp. Then I put a line of super glue. I held it upside down, the plate, put a line of super glue, and I sprayed the activator on the wood and then stuck it on there. And I taped everything off, of course. I had a paper and taped off so I didn't get spray all over. I used some electrical tape to make my X's, more to keep me from grabbing this and using that as a handle than a blade. I don't know how you get at the blade anyway with this here, but electrical tape rather than paint, I think. I can always remove it if I want to. So now I'm just going to drill a hole in the handle and re-polyurethane the top where I've sanded it. So for the little brother jig here, our crosscut sled, which is much lighter, it's narrower, doesn't have removable insets, whatever. What I did is I took the zeroplay Microjig, put some double stick tape on here, Turner's tape. Oh, forget to peel this one off. That would be a problem. Wouldn't stick. So put that on there. First I measured it and got it. They'll tell you never put it overly tight in the miter slot, or it might expand a little bit when you put the final screws from the other side in there. Might push it out a little bit and then be too tight. So I measured kind of how far up. Good thing I made this about 12 inches. I don't know if you can see that here. About 12 inches from here to here, because the fence is going to sit up to here. This fence here, my runners might run into this where the holes are going to be drilled. So I have enough room. These Microjigs are about 9 1/4 inch long here, and so that'll leave me enough room on this 12-inch board to get it in front of the back fence, which is a little thicker in here, in case any of my holes run in here. I don't know, they might be on either side. We'll find out. So how I'm going to set it down there is gonna put it even with the fence. I got the fence lined up where I want it to go, and even with the fence, using it to keep it kind of square, doesn't have to be exact, and even with the back here to kind of tell how far up and down the runners are going to be. Oh look, my runners are going to be on either side of this board. So this board is about 9 inches wide, so it's a good thing that my miter slots are wider. If it was a little out of place, the hole would have to be drilled from the top and would be blocked by this or this, but it looks like it's going to be fine. So I'm pushing against the fence. I got it lined up with the back. I'm going to put it down right on top of that. I got 2 nickels. Again, this is a sawstop, so it has very deep miters here. So I'm just pushing down on, stick that down, and then I'll turn it upside down, drill some pilot holes through there. This time I'm going to take my putty knife and peel off this runner, so I don't drill into them, because that one I drilled before I actually hit it with a drill bit. So once I drill the holes from the other side to get it centered, now they say on the instructions you can do, 4 inches apart or whatever, 3 holes, draw a straight line, yada yada yada. But I don't know, it seems like it wouldn't be as accurate because you got to find the exact middle of the miter bar here. So that push down should be good, and then I'm going to be careful lifting it up. And there we go, nickels underneath. They're on there. Now I'm going to drill through these 3 from this side, then I'm going to take them off, countersink the other side, Forstner bit, so get the head under the surface, and then put them back on. But this will give me a guide to where they go. Alrighty, so over to the drill press table next. What you want to be careful is that there's no play back and forth. You don't want even a slight movement. If you grab one corner and grab the other corner and move it back and forth, and if there's a little bit of jiggle in it, you don't want that. That'll mess you up. I've taken these off like 4 times now and readjusted them. A little tighter, a little tighter, a little tighter. They're almost too tight now. I found out that one of them was kind of a little wider at the back here than the front, so I sanded it down. One of these sides, yeah, this side. I sanded it down because it seemed whenever I tightened, this would still be a little loose, allowed to a little play, and this was a little too tight. So I took it over to my sander there and sanded some down on one side. It's still kind of snug, but there's no side-to-side play. And the other thing I accidentally did was when I first counterbored for the screw head, I did it on this side instead of the top side. And so I just had to put a wood plug in there and fill it, and it worked out fine. So now I want to do the back fence now, what I call back fence, some people call front fence. But it's pretty snug right now. So yeah, I might have to loosen a little bit. It might be a 5th or 6th time to take those off and adjust them. And when they tell you they leave 5/16 of the screw sticking out through the bottom of the board, they didn't tell you that they also plan to put washers in there, so I didn't count on the washer, so I ended up having to take a washer out just so they'd all catch good in the threads underneath. So I did use the 5-step method on this one, and though I don't have the battery in right now, it's dead. But it's just such a hair off. I did take a little feeler gauge, one of these, the smallest one I had, and put it in between the tip of this block, and then pushed it a little bit forward, and I'm about to screw it back from underside. But boy, I don't know, that's compounded 4 times the slight bit that it's off, and it was such a slight bit that I don't know, I might overcompensate even with my smallest feeler gauge. So the little brother fence, the lighter weight one, not quite as wide again, but probably be used a lot. What I did is I found some of this, I don't know if it's hardy backer or something, laying around the hardy board, whatever they call it, laying around the shop. And I did an aftermarket 0 clearance because, I think I adjusted these a few times in and out and took them on and off, and I think that made my kerf a little too wide, and I was getting some tear out, and it didn't seem like 0 clearance. So I put this 0 clearance on here with some inset screws again, 8/32, and very short screws, the little short ones used for that. And this, I stuck some double stick tape under there, but didn't peel off the bottom part, so it's not actually sticking, just the screws are holding it down. But I wanted to space it up because I'm going to stick this stuff on with just double stick tape in case I want to remove it or it gets dinged up. I doubt that top layer is very thick. And the reason I cut out the holes here is just in case I need to adjust the runners ever. So I'm just going to put that on there. It's kind of what we call aftermarket, I guess. But it'll work. It's it's not the best way to do it because it's not as straight down here as you'd like, and I used a bandsaw here. That was a mistake. It was wavering around. Used a table saw there and got smarter. It was so thin material it didn't leave much of a cut underneath. But you know, it's good enough to hold my boards about even. And I'm gonna raise this up with double stick to face the double stick under there that I put under there. But again, I didn't stick it down there. This I will. And if I need to peel it off, if it gets dinged up, then I'll just peel it off. Again, the double stick is called Turner's tape, and it's super thin. It's real thin. I got specticide to get at Woodcraft. But yeah, it's super thin. It's not like that foamy double stick stuff. Almost finishing up the little baby brother sled to the big one. And you can see I made extra fences. Always good to make extra ones. And the reason this is sloped is it's just a cut off from another piece. It was cut off there. I wouldn't have normally done that. I want to make sure this isn't higher for clamping. Yeah, it's okay. So I just drew some circles in here, and I usually take an awl and punch it. The problem is I should have done this before I put this front fence on, because it's kind of in the way for drilling. That's why to get the right angle drill out. Do this one and this one. These are past it on the end, and that one's close to past it. We'll see. But yeah, it's too short to fit the drill in the bit in there already measured. So I should have done that before I attach things. I kind of like it sitting on top of this piece. So this, I made extra piece again. I'm probably going to make at least one more. And in this, I did take the double stick tape and ran it underneath, but I didn't peel off the bottom part because I don't want it sticking to my sled. But I wanted it shimmed up equal to this, which is this part is stuck on with the double stick Turner's tape. It's really thin stuff, but I still just shim it. And it came out pretty good. It's pretty good there. I don't think you want to catch edges. You want you're sliding your board along here. I don't think you want to. It's going to slide over. It's a little higher here, which is good. Board will slide over because I usually come from left to right. This one's about even here. So anyway, I'm getting ready to drill that and put some these insets. These insets I've found, they're kind of like brass, and I think they've got plastic inside them because I popped one off when I was turning it with a screwdriver. I found out though you can just put a screw in the end of it, and Phillips head screw, and just use that, and you don't even need a T-wrench. And the screwdriver, again, it just tears right out on the screwdriver when it's got that little thread in there, even a big screwdriver. And putting huge downward pressure on it, so it popped the little edge off there, and it looked like plastic underneath brass coating. It'd be better to get stainless steel in these, I think, these little insets. But yeah, now I know you can just put a screw in there. You don't even need a T-wrench. You just use a screwdriver and put it in that way. It worked. I'm going to look at the connections back here. Don't know if you can see them. The new office. Stupid pocket door. It's kind of a pain to slide in and out. So this is it. So it's pretty small, as you can see. Everything's kind of crammed in this one little area here. At least I got a window, but it's kind of cold in this. So for the blade guard on this one, I ran pocket hole screws in the top. Originally I was going to put them in the bottom, but they kind of came out where that notch was and might have cut my bottom of my sled. I don't want to do that. I just want it attached to the fence in case I have to move the fence in or out in the future. To clamp it, I used bench dogs and this piece of wood to push in on the bottom because I knew the top would suck in. And I used bench dogs on the other end to push the clamp against it. And so they're gluing up right now. So I put the screws in the top, and I had these clamped on either side. I had these little alignment bars. I had them clamped one on each side with clamps coming out the opposite direction on the other side of the, here and across the fence, and had it just kind of keep it straight so it didn't twist too much one way or the other. That worked fine. I just put one clamp on each one of these. I am a little concerned that I might not have elevated it high enough here though, off the base. At the very bottom right here, right there, it might be a little too low. I don't want to hit this table saw. If it is, I'll have to sand it down or chisel it or something. It's close. I probably should have elevated this a little higher. But anyway, it's in there. It looked like I get good glue squeeze out on all the sides, so I think I got it mating pretty well with this clamping on the bottom after I put the top screws in to suck in the top. So I'm going to put it through the motion here. I just got a little piece of wood. Usually better to do a much wider piece. I'll show you here. And we're going to we're gonna take this level here and we're gonna put that on the board and show you the cut. I labeled fence and blade, and as you can see, shouldn't be any light through there. You can kind of feel it too. So that's that cut. Now I've got the smaller table saw, and I'm gonna run that through. I put a stop. This one that comes with the 2 Microjig, it's a stop that goes up under there. You got to build your own wood block, but it has a piece that catches, so that'll hit the front edge. My other one, the stop is over here. On the big table saw, it hits right there. Okay, here we go. Hold it up to the light. You can see it's right on. Alrighty, that's it for the operation. Can go. I got to do some other stuff. I got to do a thumbnail and all that. I can do that myself. And then we'll put it into iMovie. Probably take a couple parts. Oh no, I can do a long iMovie, right? On Facebook used to limit to 15 minutes. I can do longer, right?
No, because you have an account, it's unlimited. Or you have verified your phone number or something.
All right, so yeah, we'll put that together at some point. You can go play now. Or do your homework. Be tired tonight because we go to golf 1 to 2, then we go straight from golf to tennis at 3 at Shake Rag, and then come home after that. So when you buy the double miter bar, you get 2 of these stops. I think the single one doesn't have any. You can buy them separate too. What they didn't tell me is that this carriage bolt head, to be able to suck down into that groove there, you have to actually tighten the clamp to pull it in there, because it wouldn't fit, even though it's got a little circle extra than the oval, a little extra circle. I don't know if you can see that or not. The lighting's not the best, but to suck it down there, I thought it was too big. I even sent the company email. Of course, I haven't heard back because it was just yesterday, but I went ahead and put this arm on here, the clamp down handle, and tightened it all the way down, and then that sucked it in. The head was sticking up above it and wouldn't fit in my miter spot, and I thought, oh, what the heck, it's not a machine. I was getting ready to actually grind off the ends there. The other one I hooked to a different kind of clamp, but the problem is the carriage bolt for this is kind of short for this, so I took one out of a longer carriage bolt, but the problem is the head doesn't have the there's a little square inside the inset here that keeps it from turning, so I'm gonna have to get a T-bolt and put it in that oval. But it did work, but I'm just afraid it's going to turn. This part's going to turn, whereas this one can't turn because on the inside there's a square that fits into the plastic. I don't know, the set screw, I don't know if that's supposed to, that nylon set screw, I'm not really using it right now. I think it's supposed to go all the way through there and lock it down somehow, but you don't need it if you got the stop block on the top here. So that's what I'm using to stop this one from running all the way through, since it's a smaller one, doesn't go across to meet my stop for my larger table saw. So here are some of the measurements from my saw. Again, this big saw here is kind of heavy. I'm glad I built the smaller one too. Here's the smaller one measurements. They don't have to be exact. I wish I'd made my back fence a little higher on the small one, because it's kind of close to where the blade meets it. Whoops, I'm sorry, right there at the top. I should have made about the same as the front, so I think I did correct that on the measurements parts. So anyway, so for this, the features, it's got T-track for hold down for small pieces or angled pieces. It's got the electric tape, red tape instead of painting on there. Plexiglass. I didn't put any screws in there, and it looks like pocket hole screws were in there. They were at one point. They're not in there anymore. They were just to help hold it while it dried. It's got a stop on the side right here that meets the stop that's screwed into the base of the saw, tabletop of the saw, and so that'll stop it from going too far past through the back of the box. Again, all the measurements here on how thick everything is. Let me rearrange that. It's heavy, but it's tight. It's got no side-to-side play. My advice for when you do these is make sure and get all your, if you're using this zeroplay, miter play, to make sure that you get all of these lined up, just not too tight, not too wide. You don't want side-to-side slop. You don't want it too hard to push. That's hard to do. If you have to take them off 4 or 5 times do it. The thing is, you know, in the instructions it doesn't say after you originally adjust them from above and widen, you know, widen and narrow them to fit into the slot. It doesn't say flip them over, but it would make sense. I swear I saw somebody one time who flipped them over before applying them, because that way these screws would be closer instead of having to go through the first part of the plastic piece and then catching the threads. So that might make sense. I think if I did it again, I'd flip them over. So this one works great, but again, it's kind of unwieldy. It's, when I get older, it's going to be too heavy. If you're a young, strong guy, you can probably use it. The smaller one's going to be day to day, but it can't take as wide a board. That's the downside to it. And the back fence should have been a little bit higher, but it was leftover scrap piece. That back fence was cut out from the part that was from here to here. I used that section to build the second saw, and that's why it's kind of angled weird on the end and stuff like that. I think right there it's got like a little angle right there. That's just was cut out piece, extra piece, and that's why it's not as long all the way along the back of the saw blade. So that's the basics of it. Why build one when you can build two, right? And again, here's the specs for mine, but you can vary yours. Probably if I did it again, I might use a little bit more narrow base, maybe not quite as thick. But it does have removable inserts here, and I've got extra. It's got removable fence on the front here too, and on the back here for zero clearance. You don't really need it on the front. I mean, yeah, the dado's going to leave it on, big old dado, but it doesn't matter on the front. I call that front fence. Some people call it the opposite. But this piece is removable too, and so that will give you a zero clearance here and here for your blade. And then when I need to switch this out, make sure you build all these ahead of time, these pieces, because make sure they fit in there before you start cutting halves and halves and have that blade and have to do a template off 2 halves instead of 1 whole one. So as you can see, I made a lot of extra templates. This is for the smaller one and for the inserts here and the back fence here, and then all these ones underneath it. That's the stuff I got for my smaller one. And underneath it, these are the fences, and these are the inserts. Inserts are 3/8. I think fences are about 1/4. So they're all made ahead of time. You want to keep extra ones so you don't use the one you already got in there and have the line cut in there and then have to expand it out and put it on another board and then drill the holes. Better do them, stack them up and drill press them all at once.